when you can see and hear me. Hello, is there anybody out there? Hi, Susan. Do let me know if... Oh, Susan, fantastic, thank you. So I hope the audio is okay, but annoyingly, I dropped a bit of my main microphone audio setup yesterday in Robin Hood's Bay, which is very annoying, so to buy a replacement part. So I've got my kind of B microphone on today, so if the sound isn't as good, I'm afraid that's the reason. I didn't realise I got back to York, and it's been a long drive back to Robin Hood's Bay to look for a bit of a microphone part, so just have to accept that's lost and gone. But there we go. You know, these things happen. And so anyway, I've got my B kit on, so if the sound isn't quite as good as it normally is, my apologies, but that's just because, as I say, I didn't find out till yesterday evening that I'd lost an integral part of my audio kit. Hello, Michelle. Hi, John and Karen in Florida. And, well, let's hope that continues, Susan. And so we're almost at 7, so we'll just give people another minute to jump on. So I know that some of the buffering issues yesterday, so I did some additional video which I'm going to stick up onto YouTube in the next day or two. It's all in these bit editing and so forth, so you won't kind of missed out on anything. So all the charm of Robin Hood's Bay, isn't it fantastic? You can explore in further detail on YouTube in the coming days. So thank you everybody who joined me yesterday. It was lovely, sunny evening. Myself and Mrs. John out on the North Yorkshire coastline, having a thoroughly nice time. But we did get fish and chips, believe it or not. And by the time we got back to the car and all kind of tucked up, the fish and chips place in the village was closed. And then the next thing was we thought we'll go to Whitby. Whitby's a sure bet. And we got to Whitby and they were literally closing the doors as we arrived. So I'm afraid there was no fish and chips for us last night. So it was a bit of a disappointment. Then when I found out no fish and chips, then I'd lost a bit of a microphone as well. So all in all, that added up to a pretty damp squib end to the evening. But up until that point, it was absolutely lovely. So I think we're about on 7 o'clock. So without further ado, let's kind of kick off. So we're going to go for a walk on the walls today. And what I thought was start over here by the castle. It's a bit of a ugly roundabout, but just to kind of to emphasise what we're going to talk about here, because obviously we're talking about the city walls, we're going to talk about the defensive capacity, if you like, of the medieval city. And so the castle here, the castle location I'm going to show you in a minute, played an integral role, but as did the rivers and water, because all surrounding this area under William the Conqueror was flooded. So there's a moat, we had the river Foss over just in front of us, about 100 yards in that direction, about to cross over the River Ouse. But often when people come to York, they think, oh, there's the bits of the walls that are missing. And that's true, there are bits of the walls that are missing, but not necessarily for the reasons people understand. We'll talk about that bit as we kind of go around. Insofar as there was never walls that went across the river. You didn't need them. The rivers formed a really kind of important part of the defences. Obviously you could put obstacles, we were chains through the rivers, various things to prevent boats coming in. But also the rivers were considerably lower than they are today. So actually it was kind of a much bigger job, if you like, you know, to kind of get from small boats ashore and so forth. So that is something that we know. So we're coming across the bridge now, coming across Skeldergate Bridge, named, of course, after Skeldergate, the Viking Street of the shield makers, Skelder shield. And we'll reflect a moment on the Vikings. The Vikings really most closely associated now with York, even though the Romans kind of founded York in AD 71. There tends to be a view that kind of Jorvik is a Viking city, and not without good reason, in that they first came here in the year of 866. That time they actually arrived on foot rather than by water. We tend to think of them as always kind of invading by water, but actually in 866 they were part of what's called the Great Heathen Army, who came up from East Anglia, marched up north and took York pretty much without force, because the Northumbrian army were tied up elsewhere. But then in 1066, in September, before the Battle of Hastings, you're looking here, down towards Fulford would have been one big mass of Viking ships and vessels. That was one of the three kind of set-piece battles that sort of forged the future of England. So when we're looking at the walls, it's all about kind of response really to invasion. It's taking your vulnerabilities and creating strengths. And so the river is both a vulnerability and a strength. Isn't it a beautiful day? And the colours are gorgeous, aren't they? And hopefully you're enjoying this in high def. The sun's behind us, which is perfect. We're not be going into the sun. Let's give us a minute just to allow this kind of boat to come under. It's a nice shot. Let's just try and get that looking a bit cinematic. That's the word I'm looking for. It's tripping over my teeth. There's a lovely weather in York. Not so warm, but 20 degrees. Somewhere around that. See, he knows it's on camera now and he's getting nervous, you can tell. That we're just passing onto the bridge. So, of course, looking out now, we're looking out towards the North Sea, the eastern coast of England, and of course then across the North Sea, you've got Denmark, you've got Germany, traditionally the lands where invasion forces kind of came from. So rivers were protected by castles, and forts, and defences. And so there'd be an integral set of defences that covered from the castle that you saw just a minute ago, all the way kind of along with kind of forts, stockade, if you like, running right up to the river, then chains and other impediments running through the rivers to prevent access by the waterways. And then the walls would have recommenced here. But actually, the bit where we're going to start is one of the missing sections of the wall. So by comparison to the rivers where there never was a wall, the first bit you're going to see of the walls on today's tour actually used to be here. In fact, it was taken down around 1800. It was the first bit taken down by the corporation. You remember the story I've told you before about York's walls being in a very poor state? They'd taken a real bashing in the English Civil War, so cannon fire and so forth, they're not being looked after. And so consequently, at the beginning of the 19th century, they're in a very, very poor state and condition. And so the corporation was keen to get rid of them. Lots of other cities did it at the same time. Newcastle and so forth, and so there was a desire to get rid of the walls, but thankfully a campaign decided the issue, and they were told not only can you not get rid of them, you've got to preserve them. So this section here was the first bit to be demolished before they kind of saw sense. So this is actually a Victorian tower we're looking at here that gets up onto the walls. So there'd been a section that would have run from here down to the river. There'd been a postern tower on the riverside. So that is a missing section of the walls. So as I say, over the river, not missing, was never there. This section here, from this Victorian tower down to the waterside, is actually missing. So we access the walls not through an authentic bit of kind of medieval building, but rather this kind of Victorian stairway, pathway that takes up to Bailey Hill. So I'm going to show you the map of where we are. And when we're here, we started looking at Clifford's Tower a moment ago. So we're here, we just crossed the bridge, and we're coming on a place called Bailey Hill. And basically Bailey Hill was the site of two castles. So consequently, there's a castle here at Bailey Hill and one here at Clifford's Tower. And this is really, really kind of significant. York is the only place where the Normans built two castles other than London. So of course, not surprising, the capital, you'd look to defend that. But they saw York as being equally important, having the same, if you like, importance to their securing of the north. So actually, whilst the castle doesn't exist, the motte, the tower, you remember we talked about this quite a lot on tours. So you've got the mound, haven't you, and the keep on the top. That was here. So we're going to have a little walk into the area and have a little look at the site of York's second castle at Bailey Hill. And then between the two castles, they controlled access to the river, to the waterways. So by having these two castles together, William was really able to cement his grip on York, at least while there were significant troops here. And that grip was the enforcement to prevent the Vikings from returning. Because, as I mentioned before, 350, 400 miles across the North Sea from here, we've got the kingdoms of Denmark, and of course all the Norsemen and everything that they had to threaten. So there's nothing of the castle left, but we've got this twin mound. So we're stood on top. So we're pretty much at the same height now as when we've walked up to Clifford's Tower. So it's pretty much the same construction method. A great big mound of earth. Then you put initially a wooden castle on, eventually it would be in a stone castle like Clifford's Tower to defend it, and then you can control the waterways. You've got the walls running all the way around, and it forms then a complete defensive system for the city. Isn't it lovely up here? This lovely dappled sunshine. Hi Polly, lovely to have you on again. We've not done this section for a while. We've not done it in 1080, so I thought it was well worth having a look at it in higher def, so that when I point out things that are a bit indistinct sometimes, hopefully you'll have more clarity, you'll see more detail. So that's the idea of coming back and doing one or two of these tours not done for a while, but doing in higher sort of definition. So that, as I say, Bailey Hill, the site of the two castles. So the two castles is a brilliant indicator for us that taking and holding York was a major strategic objective for William the Conqueror. If he was going to hold on and control Northern England, York was the means by which he was going to do it. And of course they introduced this new idea, this new thing of castles. Castles was novel, if you like, to the Normans. They hadn't been seen on these shores, of course they were in forts and fortresses and so forth, but this idea of castles came across with William the Conqueror. One of the stories we've talked about, of course, him bringing with him a community of Jewish financiers to help him build these castles, so that kind of ties in this other kind of story as well. So all these kind of stories kind of weave in together. But of course what William was under no illusion was how difficult it was to hold York because of its location. The Humber estuary is about 40 miles away from here, and of course the Ouse flows out to the North Sea there, but of course it's very, very wide. And what it does mean, of course, is that major ships can come in and come up. And as we know, the Romans initially came to York via boat. They'd been down in Lincoln and they sailed up the Ouse. So it's no longer fully navigable. They put in a lock at Neighbourne, I think in 1970, to prevent sort of floods being exacerbated by tides. But at the period of time that we're talking about, it was perfectly possible to bring major vessels all the way into the city. And some clever people here have done a real nice kind of interpretation shot for us. I'll try and get myself out of the way so we can have a look at that. So we've got a pictorial representation there of the site of today Clifford's Tower, where we were just a minute ago, the Bailey Hill, and of course you see then the kind of the stockades, the wooden fortress walls running all the way down. So we've got a motte, we've got the Bailey, so of course the Bailey is the sort of community area that's protected, and again on this side we've got the motte and we've got the Bailey. Two castles, and so this is, if you like, protecting the complete river system. So you can see that there's a serious bit of defence, because basically the kind of river network of Northern England and the Midlands as well connects up to the Humber estuary. Trent runs into it, which runs down to the Midlands, and of course the Ouse taking it up to the north. So control the Humber estuary and control access, and you've got yourself all the way in. Now this part of the walls is quite a nice shadow there for myself. Insofar as, of course, it's been around for a long, long time, but it's only just become available. It's really only in the last kind of 6-9 months that this has been sort of finished, and the boards are in now. It looks fantastic, and the kind of glass here. There'd been a whole bunch of rubble, I think, put up against this in the Victorian era, and it caused kind of structural problem. It was beginning to fall down, so they needed to do a kind of a bit of renovation work on it, but they decided to open it up. So what's kind of really nice now is obviously we're able to see down into a tower that for hundreds of years has been kind of closed off. This is obviously one of the intel towers, one of the guard towers, part of the defences of the city. And what we do know is that it was the responsibility of the Archbishop of York to maintain the walls. And I can't see, I'm just looking down now because there's a maker's mark, and I'm just looking for it. It's a little bit bright down here, so it's going to elude me, I know. But there is a clue that actually the work was done here by the Minster masons, quite possibly following the disastrous Battle of Myton in 1319. Because this was one of the last areas of the walls that was wood. And so because of threats from the Scots in the early part of the 14th century, investment was put in to convert this into, stone towers. So it's likely this stone tower sort of derives from this period. I can't see that maker's mark. I'll give it one last chance to look at it. I think it was 2 up from the bottom, but last time I was here, we saw it really beautifully, but I thought I'll about shoot you in high definition, but there we go. So let's kind of walk on, and isn't it lovely? Look at that blue sky, the contrast with the grey. And of course, what's so nice about this, walking the walls in York is it prevents us with this kind of promenade. Now, of course, they weren't made for promenading. They were built for defensive purposes to give, a very, very strong ability to obviously defend the city against attack. But also, being honest, there was, and there are no ghost stories yet. We'll see what we can do about a ghost story. There was also a kind of civic prestige element going on as well. So it wasn't simply just about defence, it was about a sense of arrival, particularly when we get to the gateways where we look at those. You really kind of get a sense of arriving in a major city. And of course, at the time when the walls were sort of at that peak of their prime, if you like, in the sort of 13th and 14th centuries, England was still very much a community of villagers. It wasn't the norm to live in cities. You might visit cities periodically, but nonetheless it wasn't the norm. So consequently, that sense of awe and wonder, I think, would be very much kind of part and parcel. Just going to pan us back that way. So the trees on the top there, beautiful blue sky, it's like a Polaroid blue, isn't it? That is your Bailey Hill. So those mature trees, that's kind of covering, that's where we walked amongst to see the site of the second castle. But we've got in front of us now, the first of our corner towers, known as Beech Daughter Tower, that we believe is from the French dormier, meaning nightmare bedroom. It was the king's prison, the king's jail. People are held at the king's displeasure, high up on the walls, very cold, very drafty, kind of being forgotten about. Not a good place to be. I suspect at the time this was built, York was not the happening place that it is today, so you really wouldn't want to be detained here on the walls. It would have been rather nasty. So the nightmare bedroom jail cell. What we do get as well, we kind of come up here, is obviously as we get to look down. First of all, you get a sense of how awesome these defences were, but also how the moat kind of operated. So the moat, if you like, is effectively a river, is a waterway that surrounds the high walls, meaning you've got another layer of defence. Not only have you got these very high, steep-sided walls, you can see panning across, you've also got kind of embankments, so earthworks that are built up, but of course, you've also got a moat again. So Karen asked about people falling off, and it's one of those questions people ask an awful lot. I mean, not least because, as you can see here, there is simply nothing whatsoever stopping me from falling off here. There is no gateway, there's no barrier, there's no railings, and people do seem to get kind of quite alarmed by that. I hate to say, there's some bits where there are railings. I'll show you, usually where there's a main road, but for the most part, the worst you're going to get is a nasty kind of bump and bruise sort of falling off, because it's just earthworks down there. So I'm not saying it'd be pleasant. I wouldn't choose to fall off the walls, but it's not really a kind of life-threatening situation. So I'm not aware of anybody that's fallen off the walls, but if you do know of somebody who's fallen off the walls, do let me know. We'd love to find out their story. But of course, life on the walls in the medieval era wouldn't have been a lot of fun, because for the most part, what you're talking about people patrolling, isn't it? You know, people in kind of, the night watchmen, the constables, as you might say, the guardsmen, pretty dull. You know, a bit like the guy in the supermarket trying to watch out for sort of shoplifters. It's not actually that exciting, is it? You know, you can imagine it must have been very, very hard to keep you concentrated, keep yourself asleep, keep you from going to sleep, and so forth. You know, but of course, the diligence of the watchman is the difference between, you know, kind of being overrun at night and safety and security. So obviously the vantage points from up here are fantastic. Your ability to kind of look out around everywhere, and you know, lights of course, but equally at the same time it's been jolly difficult to stay vigilant and interested all through the night. I'm not saying that I don't think I could have done that very well. I wouldn't make a very good watchman. So of course they had to put into place to be horrible kind of penalties to threaten people that if you fall asleep, you know, you do horrible things to you. So, you know, they very much kind of worked on the stick rather than the carrot, as you might say. I do think Fulham would hurt, but I think running down the back might be nasty. Well, yeah, of course it would be nasty. It would be nasty. So here I am. Look, like I'm now. There's my toe. Should I poke my toe over that? It wouldn't be great. I'm not planning to do it. And I've managed to walk down here many times without falling off. But I just do think it's quite interesting that people's assumptions. I mean, I suppose not hugely surprisingly, given that we live in a kind of health and safety sort of focused culture. You might think that there would be, of course, railings, but you'd be wrong. There aren't. And that's fine. It just makes a nicer vista, I think. And the other thing as well is where you have got railings, particularly when you're doing this, you get that kind of slightly nasty motion sickness thing going, you know, when they're going too fast. So actually, from my perspective, I'm rather glad that it isn't. I'm prepared to risk my life and limb and sanity for your entertainment. Freed from the encumbrance of railings, because it makes for a nicer shot. So the things that I do for you guys. So we're coming up to the first of the gateways that we're going to see along the route, and this one is Victoria Bar, and apparently this is sited on location where there was a medieval gateway, but it had been closed off, which suggests, of course, that there wasn't the money in it, because the gateways obviously had to be staffed. You know, you'd have to have, you know, a man on there charging a toll and so forth, or a lady, of course, collecting taxes, etc., scrutinising who's coming in, who's not coming in, and it would suggest that the kind of trade, perhaps by the 15th, 16th century, when York's economy was going down the tubes, was insufficient to warrant another gateway here. So it's obviously sealed up. But then a new gateway was opened up to commemorate the coronation of Queen Victoria, who of course came to the throne in 1837. So this bar, what's called raised by public subscription, which reminded me of the city of York. And so we've got railings coming down here. Like, as you go down the side, there's railings. So it's not saying there are no railings. So this is quite a modern gateway compared to some of them that we'll see. Well, the next one that we're going to see, Micklegate Bar, of course, very, very grand medieval. So this really is about sort of accommodating the modern of the city. How well you can see that plaque there, but it says Victoria Bar, erected public subscription under the direction of City Commissioners, AD 1838. And George Hudson was Lord Mayor at that time. So George Hudson, of course, very famous, the kind of the railway magnate. We'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to go back up on the walls now, so we can. I'm loving the colour of this sky today. It's absolutely perfect weather for captures. So back up onto the walls, and they're closed overnight, by the way, in case you wonder. They're not open sort of in the dark. So you can see here, there's a lock there, and somebody's going to come around probably in the next hour or so and start locking up the gates. So that's just somebody's job every day. I think they start at Fishgate Poston and walk around from there. But we should be alright. We should be able to get our tour in comfortably before we get apprehended. The sun is starting to come down, which is lovely. So we now start to see, of course, across the rooftops. And I think if I give you a bit of a zoom there, you might just be able to see the Minster poking up above the rooftop. So we've got Victorian terraces in front of us here, and then of course we've got the medieval Minster behind it. So I mentioned about William the Conqueror, and he'd taken the city, built 2 castles, and after a series of kind of pushbacks and skirmishes, he finally solidified in control of the north by 1069. It's then that he embarked on what's become known in history as the harrowing of the north. I talked about it again yesterday in Robin Hood's Bay, which was the wanton destruction of the city of York and so much of northern England, because this had been where the Vikings had settled, and not only controlled but also farmed and lived. So it was a deliberate, it was what you might call ethnic cleansing, I suppose, in modern language, really, to expunge the people from the land. They would sooner have barren and deserted villages, fields burnt so you couldn't grow, etc., than they would have living in coexistence with the Vikings. So what's kind of interesting, the reason that I mention that and I mention it here is that there's a rather unusual spectacle here, which is, that's very nice, isn't it? That's nice. Is that good quality digital? Hopefully. You're looking at the tower of St Mary's Bishop Hill. And St Mary's Bishop Hill is rather unique in York in that it is the only survivor, to our knowledge, of the harrowing of the north. In other words, it's a building that predates it. And we know that tower dates to Anglo, so about 1000 AD, around that kind of period. So built during the kind of Viking occupation, but actually it was built using Roman stone. So they were using building materials they kind of used kind of lying around. So it's kind of got an interesting kind of backstory, if you like, but it survives for some reason. Probably the rest of the body of the church didn't, but the tower does. So the tower is a bit kind of ground zero, as you might say, of York, where it starts to be rebuilt. So, of course, we talk about 2000 history, but in terms of the first kind of millennia, there's very, very little that exists. We've probably got, the Anglican tower behind the walls there. We were there a couple of weeks ago by the York Museum Gardens, and we've got the tower there of St Mary's Bishop Hill, and very little else. So that 2000 years of history and bits of Roman walls, of course, and it's also important to note that so on the balls we are between Skeldergate or Bailey Hill and Micklegate Bar, Julie, walking up towards Micklegate Bar. So that's where we are today. It's important to note that there are Roman walls underneath. Underneath these embankments, we have the remains, if you like, of the Roman stone fortress, but it's been largely kind of covered over. So when we're walking on the walls, the Roman walls, if you like, are beneath us, beneath our feet, but they're not really exposed. There's a couple of bits on the walls, not on this section of the walls, where we can see Roman architecture around the kind of back of Monkgate and so forth, the Merchant Taylor's Hall. We're not going to see that today, but it's incorporated, so it's been built upon. That's what's kind of interesting about York is how it's kind of evolved to kind of meet the needs of different sort of generations. So of course, when the Anglo-Saxons came, when the Germanic people came and settled, they found an abandoned Roman fortress. So of course, why wouldn't they kind of take over a stone fortress? But of course it was a stone fortress that needed restoration, renovation. So they built sections they needed and so forth. And over time, of course, what you then get is a kind of, a kind of morphing of kind of one time era, if you like, to the next, that's based around the needs of that. And of course, if things are falling down, they're patched up, repaired and so forth, it's likely that the end result can be sort of quite different. But nonetheless, you've got a continuity. So the walls, the line of the walls is probably pretty much identical to the walls and stockades that were here previously. But at each rebuilding, they may kind of change slightly. So Nunnery Lane, yes, that's where we are. So Nunnery Lane is the lane over here. And of course, the Clementhorpe Nunnery was located just at the other side and very near actually where we sort of got on the Victoria Bar. So that's where the nunnery was. There's a small part of the nunnery wall still left behind there. On this side, we've got Bishop's Hill. So Bishop Hill is a very popular, very rather upmarket and fashionable part of York. And you can't see that much, of course, because the trees are now absolutely out into full flourish, as you might say. We've had an awful lot of rain, and so consequently everything is very green, very, very verdant. Everywhere you look is lush and green. So when I say, you have to take my word for it, that behind here is the very desirable housing development of Bishop Hill. And of course, living within the walls gives a sort of prestige, as you might say. It certainly, adds a comma here and a zero there. People want to be inside the walls. So again, as we're kind of panning down, we're looking at the car park below us, we get a sense of the elevation you've got here. So, as I kind of run along, and the sun unfortunately is the wrong place for me to do that shot, so I'll do it from this side, you get a better idea. You do get a sense now of the walls, the embankment, the moat you can imagine running across the bottom. It's a pretty imposing and impressive structure, and it certainly gives you a fantastic vista across York. As I say, I can't point in that direction at the minute because the sun would ruin the shot for me, but nice. So let's just walk up and take a sip of water, and so there's another view into York, and as you can see, nice few people walking up and down, which is lovely. So hopefully the picture and the sound are coming through nice and clear. And that's right, Julie. So Middleton's hotel is just about 2 or 3 minutes as the crow flies from here, very nearby. So in most of York isn't a large place. Now, of course, there's lots of York that's not inside the walls, but that's always been the case. It's not a case of at one time everybody was within the walls. There was always, of course, villages and settlements and so forth outside the walls. What the walls did, though, of course, was it meant that at times of peril, so attacks from the Scots, from the late 13th century, so 1296 is it onwards, kind of William the Wallace, Robert the Bruce, and so forth, is that at times of trouble, or trauma, you'll withdraw to within the walls. But it was never a case that the walls were, if you like, the full scope of the city. It's within the walls, not surprisingly. It covers a very small space. But because of the kind of the twists and the turns, the alleyways and so forth, it feels probably a lot bigger than it actually is. So if you ever come here, you'll find that it's very easy and quick to walk from one place to another. You don't need public transport. Obviously, from an accessibility point of view, the walls may be a trouble. Although, I think Chester have found a way to get people with mobility issues up onto the walls, so maybe that's something we'll have to look at in years to come. But right now, the walls are probably off limits, so it's fantastic that people can come on tours like this and have a look and kind of get the first-hand experience. But other than that, it's pretty accessible. It's flat for the most part. It's easy sort of terrain, so it definitely is a place to visit. But talking of visits, we're about to reach the place where we get the royal visits. So some of you may be aware, may remember, we greeted King Charles on his first visit here, with then Queen Consort, now Queen Camilla, back in 2022, I believe. We waited down here and greeted, and that's because this is the royal entrance to the city. And we've got a royal entrance because historically York was a second city. So I'd mentioned obviously that William the Conqueror had built 2 castles here. The only other place he'd done that in London, which is a kind of clue really of how York was viewed. And it wasn't just William the Conqueror. The Romans had created 2 provinces in Britain, in Britannia. Britannia Inferior, run from York. Britannia Superior, run from what is now London. So consequently, going all the way up to the Roman era, you had this sense that York was the capital of the north, that it was an alternative capital. And of course, before easy transportation, the distances involved, it was no easy feat to get yourself down to London. So consequently, there was a lot to be said for having a kind of permanent second city, whereby you could put and invest royal powers. You could have people working on behalf of the king, the monarch, the army, whomsoever, to ensure that your will was made law and enforced. And so York, really right up to the English Civil War, so the War of the Roses, the English Civil War, when it all begins to ebb away, had that function. It had been the capital of England on 3 separate occasions during the Wars of Independence with the Scots, because it was a lot easier to bring a parliament up here to raise taxes and so forth, and to organise armies, than it was from down in London. So we're going down the steps again now to look at Micklegate Bar. So this gateway, pointing out now towards the Tadcaster Road and the A1, is our link with the south. So the A1, of course, is the great kind of southern road that goes from right down southern Britain all the way up to Scotland. And so York is a short detour off the A1. It's not exactly the A1. Weatherby actually is precisely in between. We're going to get Weatherby soon. Weatherby is precisely in between Edinburgh and London. York's about 12 miles away. So we're a little bit of a dog leg from the centre point, but pretty damn central. So very, very well kind of positioned in that respect. So this gateway here, Micklegate Bar, is known as the Royal Gateway. You see the Royal Crest, so I'll give this a bit of zoom on it, displayed, and they were touched up fairly recently, in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, looking resplendent, glowing in the sunshine. So royal standards in the middle, And either side, we've got the crest of York, the Cross St George with the 5 lions. And it really is a fact. And of course, it is highly decorative, incredibly grand. It had a defensive purpose, but this didn't tend to be the side of York that was most vulnerable to attack. That tended to be on the other side, Booth and Barr side, attacks from the Scots and so forth. So whilst it would have had an additional gateway, they call it barbican, sort of coming out, so perhaps to about where we are with White Carriage, a second set of defences. Nonetheless, its design is as much aesthetic as it is defensive, but also there to impress. That sense of arrival. You've done this long journey from London, and here you are now at the city of York. And York was proudly independent, and there is still a lovely little kind of charade that goes on when a monarch comes, that they're met here at this site outside the walls by the civic party. The royal party will kind of park up here, the civic party will come and meet them, the Lord Mayor, the Sheriff and so forth. And it's said that custom dictates that on the first time of asking, the monarch is refused entry. And this is a reflection of York's charter, its independence. But then at the second time of asking, it's then customary to allow the monarch to pass through. So consequently, that's what we saw when King Charles came here, Queen Elizabeth came here. In fact, every monarch since William the Conqueror has been here. Such is the kind of important significance of York in royal history. Now, of course, over time, royal history becomes far less significant than parliamentary history of rule makers and commerce and industrial revolution and all those sort of things. But obviously, at the time when this was in its heyday, this was the time where kind of kings and queens, to a lesser sense, were the only game in town. And of course, we look at the kind of heraldic look of it. This kind of dates this period, doesn't it? Yeah, where kings had shields and they had heraldry and all the kind of the paraphernalia, if you like, of kingship that we still associate. So if you what people love these days, pageantry. Look at when the king was kind of crowned, and he's wearing robes that really look to belong to a medieval era. Our ideas visually of kingship are very much based on the medieval. Okay, crowns, swords, shields, heraldry, castles, all that stuff, right? So we've kind of got, even though, or perhaps it's significant, perhaps it's because, the kings sort of cease to matter, but become less and less relevant as time goes on. Certainly, obviously once we get, the Civil War and Parliament takes over, increasingly so, but it does seem to be the case that the power of kings probably reached a high watermark in the late medieval period. Even by the period of the Tudors, it's diminished. Elizabeth I is kind of really known for her weaknesses, really, rather than her strengths. If you look at it, of course, Henry VIII, very powerful monarch and so forth. But the game was effectively up in many respects for the king to be the biggest cheese. Just wait for these guys to come down. We'll go on our next section. So we're now heading from Micklegate Bar, and we're going to hopefully, I don't know exactly what we're going to see, because this is the first time I'm seeing it with you, the removal of Queen Street Bridge from above. I haven't brought us onto the wall since this out took out. So a brief kind of primer, as we're going to come round, we're going to start to see the railway infrastructure of York. And the railway is a tremendously kind of important element in the development of the city of York. We're going to let this party get past. Insofar as that, both in terms of connectivity, it created new ways of moving goods and then people, of course, into the city, but also re-establishing that strategic importance by location between London and Edinburgh. So York had been a major staging post for the stagecoaches, of course, kind of North Road, and was certainly under the Georgian era, and perhaps reached its height as this kind of alternate capital of England, certainly for society, a societal capital. But the railways give it a real shot in the arm. But of course, alongside the railways was then a big lift in other forms of transport. And so the trams came in, predating, of course, the motor car, And so the bridge that was located down here, Queen Street Bridge, was actually here to allow the trams to go over the railway lines. Now, of course, the trams went a long, long time ago, but the bridge was here until, what, 3 or 4 weeks ago? And there's still a section of it left, because obviously there's a major engineering undertaking. And one of the genuine concerns of this was that it might sort of upset the walls, as you might say, because the walls had been leaning up against this bridge for 150 years. So what might happen to that earth when you took it out? So we've still got, you see, a massive kind of pile driving drill over here. We've still got engineering works on here. It's not complete. A new road has been created there, so we see the bus down there. That's driving down a road that didn't used to exist. But it's only partially demolished. They're having to do a certain amount of work to ensure that the removal of this bridge doesn't in any way jeopardise the walls. But I think you're really starting to get a sense out. And of course, what this is going to do is giving us new vistas on the walls from the ground level, which I think will give us a real sense of quite how impressive these walls would have been quite high up. I mean, you really do feel very much up in the sky up here now. You know, this is one of the highest parts of the walls in the city, and it does seem a long, long way back down from up here. So as I say, this has been an area in transformation, so it's nice to just keep doing tours and to show you that. I'm going to capture that to York in transition, because as I've said before, so we've got railings. For those lovers of railings, we now have railings in place on this side, so you don't have to worry too much. It's easy to think about York as, you know, a place of history, but it's also a city in transition. The site behind us is what they call York Central, and when I was a kid, this was a major centre of train manufacturing. Brell, the British Rails Engineering Limited, were based there. There's 20,000 people at one time worked in train making in York. And it's all gone. It was sold off to various companies, ABB and so forth. And bit by bit, it closed down. And most train making in this country now has kind of fallen away. It was a major employer. So, I mean, again, even the recent history of my lifetime, industries, kind of chocolate, train making, etc., have very much kind of fallen by the wayside. So you mustn't ever think that York is a place where kind of history has stopped still. We've got lots of old buildings that find relevant reasons to exist for today. But equally, at the same time, we've got a constant churn, a constant kind of change, which I think is refreshing. I don't think places are living museums. So kind of interesting. So even though we've sort of got a part of the big reveal, it hasn't really fully happened as yet, because obviously still this section of bridge is still there. And what that connects us to then, of course, is the railway station. And this is York's second railway station. Not that we've got two stations, but rather it was the second to be built. The first one is also being kind of exposed down there. So this archway that you're about to come into view, just now you can see you see that black sort of skip down if I come in there. That opening there in the walls was about, you know, kind of the railway. It's now the West offices, the council buildings are where the first station was. And when that opened in the 1830s, it was located inside the city walls. But actually it wasn't at all a good location, because trains had to come in one way and reverse back out the other way, like Manchester Piccadilly. It's very slow. It's not a good way to do it. So they soon realised they needed what they call through platform. In other words, the train can go in one direction, or one way, in one, you know, both ways, but you know, they don't have to turn around. And so York Station, famously designed by a called Thomas Prosser, who was the architect for the railway company, also Durham Station, Knaresborough, and a variety of others. This was his kind of masterpiece. He, when this opened in 1873, this was the biggest station anywhere in the world. So again, another kind of indicator really of the prestige of the city, and also the volume of traffic passing through it. You know, so that still to this day, every train going between London and Edinburgh will stop here. So it's possible to kind of get, I don't know, 8 trains an hour, I'm going to say, maybe 10, I'm not quite sure, any given day to London. So all day long, we've got trains from London to Edinburgh passing through here, and it's incredibly long. It's got one of the longest platforms anywhere in Europe, so it means that we can take the big, you know, very, very long, sort of 13, 14 carriage trains, can kind of run through. So, you know, it has remained a major railway interchange. even though our railway engineering is no longer kind of part now of York's kind of employment offer, which is a shame. But things move on. So again, looking again for the first time up above, you're looking at sites that have simply not been available. You haven't been able to see any of this. Well, you wouldn't be able to see, because I'm not sure the walls were open when it was first built. So we're literally seeing this for the first time in history, or at least from this vantage point. Just don't forget that the walls opening up for sort of public promenade is into the late sort of Victorian period. So it may well be the story to be built. I couldn't say for sure, but it is entirely possible that we are looking at this as almost the first humans really to kind of get this vantage point of our city. So fascinating really, and what it does remind me of is as a kid coming on many occasions to the Viking dig that were at Coppergate, which of course is its 40-year anniversary. Big holes in the ground, and looking at York. So to me, there's always been a kind of free-sort of excitement of seeing York uncovered. When they start peeling back the layers, because you're seeing things that haven't been apparent or haven't been visible for a long time. So I actually enjoy the scooping away. I know that it might sort of sound counterintuitive when you're trying to make everything beautiful and for the visitors and everything, but equally at the same time, being able to see things that no one's seen for 150 years, I think is an enormous privilege. And it doesn't bother me that it looks a bit tatty and there's a digger there. The fact is we're seeing York in a new way. I think that's fabulous. And what it does mean as well, and don't underestimate for a second the politics of this, because it's taken forever. I mean, when I was working in York, I left 20 years ago, York Centre was the biggest thing, and it still is the biggest thing. It's the biggest brownfield development site in Europe, that's central. In effect, there's scope for a whole New York to sit on the site behind here, in terms of commercial, residential, domestic, what's it called, residential, like offices, businesses, buildings, parks, you name it. It's going to be developed on the other side of the station. It is a tremendous opportunity. It's going to give a very, very significant boost to York. The difficulty, or the challenge, if you like, for the policymakers is how to make sure that enrichment benefits everybody, because there's a tendency in York, and we're looking at it right now, of drawing in money from people who've already got money. So this development here, and again, former railway offices that are being cleared, I think that's what Julie was talking about a little bit earlier. His offices are being cleared out, and then they're placed luxury flats. They have no beef whatsoever. They're not necessarily my choice statistically, but there's a tendency to provide for the people that are already well provided for, to give them new options for enjoying the city. And that I think if we start pricing people out of the city, we're on a slippery slope, because of course as a tourism city we need people that are going to be able to work in the service industries, in tourism, in hotels and restaurants and so forth. So we need to make sure that this growth of the city, and that's what it's going to be, a huge expansion of York beyond the side of the station, can ensure that there's affordable opportunities for the young people of today to set up and get properties and be able to bring up their families and live lives not kind of worried about insecure housing. So a little rant over. I'm not negative about it. I think it's just a great opportunity, but as with all these things, every building that goes up is an opportunity, and every time the buildings become places that are very expensive and very wealthy, is another opportunity missed. So you really got to hope that there is a focus on this, as you might say, and that we can look at prosperity for everybody, not prosperity simply for the elite at the top. Talking about the elite, the beautiful station hotel, or former the Principal Hotel, the former State Royal York Hotel. Victoria famously stayed there. Isn't it glorious? Yeah, I'm sure kind of very excited. So this again was built as part of the station. So you got kind of the station, sort of concourse, and the hotel. So again, a lot of these, if you go to Midland, Manchester, another kind of station hotel, very much the fashion of the Victorian era. When you build a big interchange station, you build a very grand hotel next to it to kind of service the needs of the sort of travelling public, because it was very much around, could look after the well-to-do and the wealthy, as with today, let's be honest. They're going to spend plenty while they're here, so it's always a kind of good idea to build for the luxury end of the market. So this we're kind of coming into is probably one of York's most famous if I get a bit of pan there, you'll see obviously the Minster, and for years this was one of the best-selling postcards in the city. And you'll still see, if you type in York in Google, I guarantee within about 2 or 3 images you'll get that image. The photographers always stand here and take that shot. You need a bit of zoom to do it, but they always do. It's kind of characterful of York, and it sort of tells a story, doesn't it? You know, it's the walls drawing you in to the Minster, the splendour. We've got the War Memorial in the background, and the greenery, and I think it sort of encapsulates York. But of course, in that particular shot, you've got a real mishmash. You know, you obviously got the medieval walls, albeit the walls that were kind of rebuilt in the Victorian era. But you've also got the industrial economy, insofar as we've got the major railway headquarters that we'll look at as we're going to go past now. The Grand Hotel, the beautiful Grand Hotel that we've visited during York Unlocked. The building coming to view now, so this is West Offices. So this kind of glass and stone. This is, it won a lot of awards for architecture. This is the council offices, but this was the former station at York. So the first station here, inside the walls, second station over here, outside the walls. So 1870s on this side, 1830s on this side. Now obviously that was redone, I think that was all maybe 10 years ago, I'm going to say. That would have been finished, West Offices. It's a beautiful, you know, conversion. Brilliant job that the architects and construction people did. So we've got these 2 stations, which again, I think shows you how important that the railways were. That having built one in a location that didn't really work so well, they didn't go, oh well, never mind. They set about and rebuilt it within. So look at that sky bill. It's fantastic, isn't it? Within 40 years. They'd not only rebuilt it, they'd built the biggest station in the world in its place. And that's because York was this major centre for the railways. I mentioned earlier George Hudson. So George Hudson was the mayor in 1838 when Victoria Bar was opened. And George Hudson was an absolute key figure in York's history, because it's worth kind of knowing that York's economy hit the skids in the later medieval period and through the 16th and 17th centuries. It was kind of lifted up in the 18th century by the very, very wealthy Georgians, but really by that stage it became a service economy. It was about providing for the needs of the super rich who had their holiday homes in York, that will come and spend sort of several months a year in York, have a kind of season here, as you might say. So lots of money to be made by the craftspeople, people selling them kind of, you know, furniture, cutlery, and dress, and all these kind of things, and food, but the real industry of York, which had been based on kind of textiles going all the way back, as you might say, sort of part of Yorkshire, had massively fallen away. But the railways give it a massive shot in the arm. So for the first time, York, if you like, becomes part of the Industrial Revolution. It's accessing new cash. And of course, what the railways did was provide ways of moving goods, particularly coal, around the country. The moving people bit was not secondary, but it certainly wasn't the primary reason. The reason the railways were brought into being was by and large to move coal. It's a source of energy from the coal fields to the factories. Because the quicker you get the coal to the factories, the cheaper it was to transport. So therefore it made your goods more competitive. So it made British goods. So at the time when Britain was, you know, the revolution, was of course, you know, the workshop of the world, as you might say. It was the railways that were supercharging and driving this by making it cheaper to move the fuel from the coal fields to the factories. So the investment in the railways, a bit like there'd been sort of half century, 70 or 80 years before in the turnpike roads, was driven completely by private investment. So it was wealthy individuals that were buying stocks and shares, and they were, you know, putting money into the railways. And early on, there was a huge amount of money to be made. The returns were huge. But of course, like a lot of things, they if you like, picked the low fruit early on. And so whilst there was a lot of money to be made in the early easy bits, as time went on, it got progressively more difficult to connect bits up. So look down there, look through, pretend you're a medieval garden. So when it comes to areas where there's very poor drainage, or there are structural faults in the stone, or very, very marshy, whatever it might be, or there's big chasms, big areas to cover, these become much more difficult and much more expensive to build the railways. And of course, at this point, people aren't necessarily being as honest as they might be about the risk and return element of people's investments. And so George Hudson found himself in very hot water indeed. He was bankrupted, nearly jailed, he was disgraced. His record as Lord Mayor was kind of expunged for a while. His street, which only took 100 years to restore it, George Hudson Street, was got rid of. And the ultimate slap in the face, the statue of George Hudson, which should have been right there, so statue in the middle, was replaced by George Stephenson, who's actually the head of engineering rather than the kind of the chief financier bloke. So a very, very public fall from grace, which in some respects is meant to be how capitalism works, right? That if you take risks with other people's money and you lose out, then you pay the price. Well, he certainly paid the price. It's difficult to see that we still hold those rules, really. We look at the casino behaviour of the banks that kind of crashed the economies around the Western world, what is it, 10, 15 years ago now, that got away with a lot of money and didn't really seem to get any form of penalty that I can remember. Maybe the odd one went to jail, but for the most of them, they all got away scot-free. And we're all paying for it with much lower standards of living and pensions as a result of that. So perhaps actually they had a better idea in the Victorian era of probably shaming and holding people to account when they took massive risks with other people's money. But that's another story for another day. So we're coming to the end of this section of the walls. It's 5 to 8, so I guess we're coming to the end of this tour as well. Again, we're coming up to the river. So it's, again, as with the bridge from what we started off by Skeldergate, you didn't build a bridge over the water. But the bridge that's here now, Lendal Bridge, is a relatively new addition. Insofar as that it wasn't here when these walls were opened up. What there was here was a ferry that ran from one side to the other. And if you know, and those that have been, the Perky Peacock, we'll just go down there, we'll finish up by the Perky Peacock today. There was a ferry that ran from one side of the river to the other. And it was famously used by Florence Nightingale. Isn't that fantastic? So Florence Nightingale came here to York. She used the ferry. So what's called Barker Tower was where the ferryman would have his boats and he'd carry across from one side to the other. And of course we've got two towers here. We've got Barker Tower and Lendal Tower, one either side of the river. And so this is very much, really, a reflection of what we talked about earlier with Bailey Hill Castle and Clifford's Tower, insofar as a tower either side of the river, which will allow you to control access. And this did very much the same thing, but this time for duty, so for taxation and so forth. The chains could be strewn from one side of the river to the other. So we've got Lendal Tower on the far side of where we are now, we've got Barker Tower on this side, and the bridge in between the two. So you can imagine the bridge is missing. So take out your Photoshop, right, get rid of that bridge, and that, what you've seen down here, would have been a landing platform, a jetty, and a ferry to carry from one side to the other. And what we know is that Lendal Tower is considerably built up. It would have been originally the same size as Barker Tower. And if we give you a little bit of a zoom, just over here, can you just see there's a bit of roof, the grey lead that is still apparent, and that is the original roof. So Lendal Tower considerably built up, very rather grand. It's staying there now, so that's terrace up at the top, but would have much more resembled Barker Tower as it is now. And Barker Tower, by the way, its name relates to bark, and the bark was used as tannin, and tannin was used to create leather. So animal skins created, or treated rather, with tannin. Once it absorbs it, it'll convert them to leather. So it preserves and strengthens, to a degree waterproofs it. And this area that's sort of passing under the bridge here is known as Tanner's Moat. So just by the city walls, this is where the tanners, the leather workers, would work. and it was known to be particularly stinky, a horrible place to be. So at the Barker Tower there, so the tower that's treating the bark, the tannins, this is where the leather would have been made in the city. And of course we know we had all the slaughtering and the butchery, the shambles. So it's another part of the city's kind of meat industry, or related, if you like, to the kind of meat industry. He said, I'm not sure if I've ever taken you down this bit, so I think we'll finish up down here. And so Julie was mentioning about the Norwich Union building a few times. I thought I'd wait till we came down here. This building is in front of us now. So it's gone. It's no longer in insurance. It's now Mel Maison. There is a roof terrace up there that gives you a fantastic vista of York all the way to the Minster. And I've always found it sort of slightly hard to love, but Mel Maison's a top brand. I'm sure it's great inside. But yeah, the smell would have been horrendous, because obviously what you're talking about is treating animal skin, removing that, and then rubbing in these kind of tannins and letting it dry and so forth. And where I live, in drink houses, going back to the Roman era, they believe that drink houses come from drying houses, that actually once they'd been treated, then take obviously a period of time to dry, and they were kind of stretched out in drying places on what is now the Knavesmire, or kind of raised bit of land, drink houses, drying houses. So again, it all kind of related into this production of leather here in York. So there we go. We've had our hour together, which has been fun, and I'll give you one last view of the walls. And as you see the vehicles kind of coming through here, you'll see how the Victorians didn't simply just build the railways, but also adapted the walls. Once they decided they were going to keep the walls, they decided that it needed to create new openings to allow vehicles to incoming and ingressing, whatever it is, to get in and out, basically. So a variety of archways were created, which kind of future-proofed. This was a kind of really cool thing to do, because what it did do is it meant the city could grow, it could evolve, and you know, it could become the modern city, but a city that was, if you like, enveloped by these medieval walls and charm. So you know, I think it was a great solution. You know, it's a modern city that's wrapped, you know, with a kind of medieval coat, which I think is absolutely wonderful. So I love it dearly. I do hope you've enjoyed that tour part of the walls. We'll do another section of the walls in 1080 HD. I do hope the picture and the signal has been solid, and I'll look forward to having a look at that a little bit later on. If I've missed any questions, I apologise, but do let me know very quickly while we're just kind of walking up here if there's anything that I've missed, and I'll happily answer your questions before we go away. Yeah, the juxtaposition's nice, isn't it? And I say that's what's lovely about York is you've got a bit of everything. Insofar as you've got really nice Victorian buildings like the Grand here, we've got obviously medieval, Minster, walls, etc., albeit kind of reframed and rebuilt in the Victorian era. We've got fabulous Georgian buildings, and a bit of everything sort of in between, really. So it really is something for everything. It's a sort of smorgasbord of architectural delights, and always pleased to bring it to you. So I'm not sure we're going to be next week, but we'll be somewhere interesting out and about over the weekend, and I don't know where yet, but I'd really enjoyed getting to the coast yesterday, so hope you enjoy that too. If you haven't already watched it, do look out for that, my tour of Robin Hood's Bay. And I'll say the additional material going online very soon that I filmed in the areas where the signal was dropping out. So we'll finish off walking down here with a view of the Grand Hotel, which I guess is probably the best expression of the wealth the railways brought to York, grandeur, that is now, of course, a 5-star hotel, but with surprising little modification. That the standard, if you like, of accommodation for these railway executives is akin to what we now think of as 5-star luxury. So thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure, as always, both yesterday and today. Thank you, everybody, for your support. It is most welcome, most appreciated, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. So thank you from York. Weekend. Bye-bye.